Morning, and thank you. And I want to thank CARB for the opportunity to be here, and Jim for providing me a slot to deal with the overflow in my afternoon presentation.
Fred, you might want to align yourself a little better with the mic.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a first slide, please. Let me just say while that's coming up, for those of us from the outside who are essentially without portfolio, as I am, I'm waiting for that slide to come. Not that one. No, you're going the wrong. You have to back up. Back up one more. Okay, I'm going to switch over here then. Jim showed you his credentials, which are very impressive. Mine, not so much. I would just have to say I've been doing this stuff for 40 years. I'm probably the oldest guy in the room and maybe the baldest, so why don't we just let it go at that? If you really want to know, I can tell you at the break. Next, please. This slide echoes what Jim had shown. There was no collusion. We did this independently. But I really want to focus on this end because this is typical of these age-specific mortality graphs. They all come together at some point where we're all going to die. What's important for this discussion is that half of all deaths are in this age group. It includes a few of us and has not been studied very much. So when we find things down in here, they may not apply up in there. Next, please. Now I have some bad news for those of you who are building a career around PM2.5 mass. It's not really a pollutant. It's a collection of substances that really relate to the method in which they were collected. I'm probably one of the few people in this room who's ever held one of these filters in his hand, but they collect all kinds of things. And the problem with that is that you don't know what to control based on what you have found on that filter. There are no sources that emit PM2.5. They only emit constituents. So if we don't study the constituents, you don't know what to control. That's a fact of life, but it hasn't been recognized. Indicators are part of the regulatory process. It was mentioned this morning. The first thing you do is select an indicator. That's all well and good for regulation, and I certainly don't have any problem with the fact that we are regulating. The problem is that you can't do epidemiology on indicators because they're all surrogate measures. And what you learn in Statistics 102 is that when you have a surrogate measure as your independent variable, you can't find the threshold because it's obscured by the error involved between the real stuff and the collection of mass. So it's high time that we, and I'm sorry, Aaron, if it affects your global project, but PM2.5 in India is certainly not the same as it is in California. So I'm just not at all sure it makes any sense to keep on using this measure. Okay. So the next slide, please. I think okay, that's the one. There are essentially 3 statewide studies of long-term PM2.5 mortality in California. Now, Michael Jarrett's very interesting study is not included here because it's just LA. Now, I'm not going to say whose cohort is better than somebody else's cohort. That's not the point. The point is the size. That if you're going to try and make sense out of all 3 of these studies, you have to weight by the number of deaths. And the slides that show 6 cities all through the women's health study and so forth don't take account of that. So if one wanted to come up with an overall estimate, you really have to have this number. Now, the Ostro study was mentioned earlier. I have more on that this afternoon. I'm trying to whet your appetite to stay tuned. Let's go on then, please, to slide number 18. Have to bear with us a moment. And no fear of reading ahead. That's it. Now, the other problem with the kinds of air pollution epidemiology that we've all done is that we have to rely on the locations that EPA chooses to take data. And this slide, which is from our 2006 paper on traffic, shows that counties that happen to have NO2 measurements are on this line. The ones that don't are over here. That's a factor of 10 difference in terms of traffic density and in terms of many other pollutants. So we have gone to great pains to try and make studies that do involve all counties, and I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. And I think that's it. Oh, yes, that's it. Now, the last slide has to do with whether we really know what the emissions are. There are people, including here in California, who are making on-road measurements of vehicle pollution. And what's being found over and over again is that in 2000 here in Los Angeles, almost 70% of the total fleet emissions are coming from 10% of the vehicles. Now that's a huge problem. It has to do with smog checking, and I'm not going to go there. I don't really know anything about the California regulatory system. But what it tells us two things. It tells us we have some low-hanging fruit to pick, which are the high emitters. And there was some fruit picking going on earlier today on some of the slides. I'm talking about a different kind of fruit picking here. And furthermore, we don't really know what the emissions are. If 70% are not from the regulated vehicles from which all the models are based on, we don't know what's out there. We've done studies as if we did, but I'm just pointing this out as a major problem in trying to get to the root of the matter. That's it for now. Stay tuned, and I'll talk to you again this afternoon. Thank you.